This is the Good Government Show.
The Weather Service in different forms have been around since 1870. It's the only agency actually in government that has the word prediction or forecast in it. So it's the only agency that's actually by mission predicting a future state, in this case, the atmosphere. You have the Weather Service, really focusing on public safety, and we're authorized by law to do that. I used to tell people we predict from the sun to the sea, from Guam to the Middle Atlantic, from the North Slopes of Alaska on the Arctic coast down to the Caribbean every day. When you ask, is it worth it? It's essential.
$4 a day. Think about that. For just $4 a day, you could get the most accurate weather forecast in the world. That's the cost to taxpayers for the best weather forecasting anywhere, and it comes from the National Weather Service. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I'm your host, Dave Martin. First, help us share the message of good government by liking us and sharing us where we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And always share our show with your friends. And don't forget to review us. Let's get everyone excited about good government. Okay, so on this show, I'm talking with Dr. Louis Uccellini. For more than 33 years, he worked at the National Weather Service. For 9 years, up until 2022, he was the director of the National Weather Service. Before that, he spent 11 years at NASA. Today, he's a research professor at the University of Maryland. He's also a fellow with our friends at the National Academy of Public Administration. This is an organization dedicated to improving public service. He said his retirement lasted all of about 2 months, and I asked, and he still says he checks the weather forecast several times a day. When you listen to him talk, you hear both the incredible knowledge he has about working in government, but also the passion he brings to weather forecasting and working for the government, specifically the National Weather Service. Coming up, a masterclass in the science of weather forecasting and how to direct an organization like the Weather Service. It's also a masterclass in hearing what folks do in public service and how they fulfill their mission. And that mission is to serve all of us and figure out when it's going to rain. So after the break, Dr. Louis Uccellini, former director of the National Weather Service. AI isn't the future of government, it's happening now. Let Polimorphic power your government with AI like other agencies are already doing. Polimorphic helps you power resident-first service to streamline requests while reducing staff workloads and speeding up how your citizens get answers. It's a secure system that's built for government. You'll see immediate results with more informed citizens. Want to see how AI can help you power a service-first government? Visit polymorphic.com. That's polymorphic.com. County government affects more people than any other form of government. That's why we like talking to so many representatives of county government here on the Good Government Show. They are the voice of public service. The National Association of Counties, or NACO, supports all 3,069 counties across the USA. This year, their annual conference is in Philadelphia in July. Plan to attend the conference and join them in their efforts to bring good government to America's counties. Check out the details at naco.org. That's naco.org. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I'm happy to have with me Dr. Louis Uccellini, the former head of the National Weather Service. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Now, I'm going to run through your rather impressive list of credentials. You've had 33 years in the National Weather Service. You were most recently the director of the National Weather Service from 2013 to 2022. You were the director of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction for a few years before that, director of the National Weather Service Office of Meteorology. Prior to that, you worked for NASA. You're on the World Meteorological Organization. You're a U.S. permanent representative. Let me think. Have I missed any of your highlights of your credentials? You're a doctor. You won an award for the Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal from NASA. Yes?
Yes.
So you've been busy.
Yeah, I've been busy, both in the research and operational community.
And now you're at the University of Maryland. You're a research professor there.
Right.
So what do you do for fun? Just look at the
sky? Gardening. Yeah, during the winter, I'm focused on winter weather, snow. That's what got me interested in meteorology in the first place, but snowstorms on Long Island. So,
all right. Well, I was going to ask, I mean, how does one become a weatherman? What got you interested in deciding to spend a career looking at the sky?
Well, when my parents were alive, they would tell you that I was interested in looking up and pointing at clouds before I could even talk. My first recollection is my mother taking me to the window when it was snowing because she knew I would, settle down, just,
Here, kid, have some hot chocolate and look out the window.
Yeah, well, I'm talking 2, 3, 4 years old.
Okay.
That I was, fascinated with the world in front of me turning white, the whole world changing right before my eyes. And I always wanted to understand how it could snow, how it could change terrain on Long Island while it was still snowing in New York City. All these questions always popped into my head as a kid. I don't know how that happens.
All right.
I was interested and I was able to fulfill my dream.
Have you been
as many other meteorologists do. So
have you been up to the Arctic or down to the Antarctic? So you've been surrounded by snow everywhere?
No, I haven't, but I used to read books on the Arctic and how it stayed snow covered or ice covered even in the summer, which isn't necessarily true anymore. But but I never been to it. In fact, the Antarctic is the last continent that I have not been on. So
all right, well, I'm sure I have a feeling you can make a phone call and talk to somebody. So let's just talk a little bit about the National Weather Service. What does the Weather Service do? What is your mission at the Weather Service?
Well, the mission is to provide observations for weather, water, the hydrologic component, climate, and to provide those observations, forecasts, and warnings. And now the provision of impact-based decision support services have been inserted into that mission statement for the protection of life and property and the enhancement of the national economy. It's the only agency actually in government that has the word prediction or forecast in it. So it's the only agency that's actually, by mission, predicting a future state, in this case, the atmosphere. Very exciting and very challenging. It's been around, the Weather Service in different forms have been around since 1870. So it's been a challenge getting the predictions right to us. Now, it can't be perfect, but getting it so it's useful for decision making. And that's what's really important now. The predictions are good enough. The observations are good enough to be useful for critical decision making. So that's what motivates people to come into the Weather Service, including me.
So let me just, kind of play devil's advocate with you for a minute. There's a joke that says, oh, I'd love to be a TV weatherman. You can be wrong all the time and keep your job. Tell me why that's true or why that's not true.
Well, it might have been more true back in the days when I was growing up. Yeah. Because the expectations were pretty low for the predictions. And what's happened in my lifetime, and I've played a role in some of this, is that predictions have gotten good enough, mostly because of the introduction of numerical modeling into the forecast process. But I would say since the early 90s and especially at the turn of the century, they've gotten good enough that decision making has come to rely on them. And those who don't rely on them, on these forecasts, and try to conduct their business if they're weather sensitive, can't do it. So it's really been a major revolution, I would say, in forecasting. That sure, we still get jokes, but there's a lot more people using this information for life-saving decision, and decisions related to the not only life but livelihood, and business and the financial markets, et cetera, et cetera. So it's become a very integral part of decision making throughout this country.
We're talking right now at the end of April. There's a lot going on in Washington. There's a lot of talk in Washington about cutting the budget for NOAA and also cutting the budget for the National Weather Service. I think there was one senator who said, why do I need NOAA? Why do I need the Weather Service? I can just turn on my local news forecast and I can, get my weather forecast there. Is this money well spent? Is the National Weather Service performing the right function?
Yes. I honestly believe that. The infrastructure needed to make a forecast involves global observations, global modeling, which is very expensive. In fact, the introduction of numerical modeling actually was a big part of the start of the mainframe computers, the supercomputers that we think of now for just managing the data information, is also critical for running these numerical models. That takes not only, it takes money, but it takes follow through, sustaining the operation on a 24/7 basis, 365 days a year. That's not an easy task to do. Secondly, there's forecasting needed for every community. The Weather Service covers the domain from Guam to the Central Atlantic. Guam is in the Western Pacific, all the way to the Central Atlantic, from Alaska, northern Alaska, all the way into the Caribbean, day in, day out. And it's a critical public service that needs to be there for everybody all the time. Now, there's tailored information, specific information that's needed for decision-making in business, in public safety, in at work sites, really, really specific. The green energy now demands a very detailed weather forecast. That's the role of the private sector, in my opinion. So there's a partnership. And that's the thing that I think needs to be understood. It's not an either or today. There's an incredible partnership in the United States. In fact, the United States is leading the world in this, where we provide information, free and open information that goes out, can be used by the public. It can be used by anybody, including and especially the private sector, that's serving specific customers with tailored products that is critical for this country moving forward. So we meet, we interact, we collaborate with private sector in every stage of the process, from observations through the production of the models, through the dissemination of information.
Why does the government have to do it when I can just, go to AccuWeather or go to Weather Underground on my phone or my WeatherBug app?
Yeah, well, they rely on every bit of data that we produce. Every bit of data and observations in the models are in the satellite observations. That's billion-dollar, getting those satellites up there and sustaining them. That's an infrastructure that they rely on to provide these specialized, tailored services, which I believe are really important for the livelihood of this country. But, if you have a monopoly, there's another thing about the private sector's role in all of this. You have the Weather Service, really focusing on public safety, and we're authorized by law to do that. And then you have a private sector with tailored products and services to specific customers. So including the airlines, including trains, including energy.
So they're different missions, you're saying?
It's different missions, and it's yet there's a relationship that needs to be sustained. Now, what's interesting, in countries that go totally private, so that everything is done by one company winning some bid, the rest of the private sector in that country dies. It just fades. It just goes away. In this country, we don't have that. It's been growing. It's grown now to my understanding is a $13 to $15 billion annual industry. No other country in the world has
forecasting. Private weather for $13 billion.
Forecasting. Yeah. Wow. It's big business. It's big business.
So we're Project 2025 has said that NOAA and the National Weather Service is, quote, a colossal operation that has become one of the main drivers of the climate change alarm industry. How do you respond to that?
So it's complicated as everything else is.
Nothing simple.
So first of all, NOAA has basically 5 line offices. Right. National Weather Service is one of those 5. Within that, one of the 5, you had Craig McLean on, is the research component in oceanic and atmospheric research. They have been one of the leaders, if not the leader, in the development of global models directed towards the study, towards the research of climate change. They developed this in partnership, not only within the other agencies in the United States, but also with partners around the world. and they're known for that. The models forecasts that for climate change that they produced in the 1990s are actually verifying today, right? It's getting warmer at rates that are actually larger than what they were modeling. Okay, so one has, and the impact of that on the natural system that they predicted would happen is happening. For example, a warmer climate can handle more water vapor, so you're going to get heavier rainfall, greater rainfall rates than we had before. And that's happening. You're having incredible destruction with these flash floods now, whether it's not only in the most recent one in Asheville that got a lot of attention that was associated with a tropical system, but you basically had rainfall rates that they'd never observed before, just like Tennessee had one back in 2021. When I looked at the damage from that in these river valleys, southwest of Nashville, Tennessee, it looked like an inland tsunami. Okay, that kind of destruction. And the same thing again in Asheville with buildings turned into splinters and boards filling a lake that, it was incredible seeing the amount of destructive material at the top of that lake with a boat sitting on top of it.
Right.
Okay. So this is happening, and they had the responsibility through the government to report on the changing climate every year. They had to give a status report. That's not an alarm. I mean, and they did it in partnership.
Right.
They did it in partnership with academic communities, other agencies, and with the global partners as well. So these are what came out of that part of NOAA. When they conflate the Weather Service with that, I should note that we don't have in our mission statement, and didn't have in our mission, and didn't even have in our authorization for the Weather Service, the words climate change. So they're really fundamentally conflating our role in forecasting weather out to 2 weeks in advance and providing the data and from one center, the seasonal forecast out to 9 months. That was the range of time that the Weather Service was responsible for and still is responsible for.
So right now, it appears that some 500 people have left the National Weather Service. How understaffed is the Weather Service, and how big an effect is the loss of these people from the service?
So it might even be greater than 500 now after last week, from what I've heard.
Okay.
Again, a lot of these changes are made not in a very transparent way.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get that information of exactly what's happening. But my understanding is it's gone beyond that. Well, I think it provides incredible risk to the National Weather Service actually meeting its mission that it cherishes to provide the observations, the forecast warnings, and impact-based system support services on a 24/7, 365-day basis. There's no downtime for the Weather Service. And we're covering an area that's about half the Northern Hemisphere from the tropics up to the Arctic. It's an incredible responsibility with a number that's around 4,000. So that's a very efficient, when you have 4,000 individuals providing this life-saving information and this the products and services that are used by the private sector as well.
Right.
4,000 people serving a country with 330 million. So when you talk about how much does it cost, it costs an individual. McDonald's has gone up in price now. So
yes.
We used to say, a Big Mac and fries and a Coke. All right, one meal from every individual pays for the National Weather Service, about 1.2 to 1.3.
So it's about, I read somewhere, it costs the American taxpayers $4 a day to fund the National Weather Service. Is that accurate?
That's close. Yes, yeah. It's 4 to 5. I've heard 5 used.
Okay. So one of the things I read was that they're talking about having to cut back from multiple daily forecasts to like just one per day. Does that really matter?
It matters at times when changes are occurring.
So as long as everything's fine,
a forecast for a normal shower turns into a flood-producing rainfall event. Things have come together a bit stronger than originally forecast. So it just offers increasing risk. And it's this collaborative relationship now that was built from what we call the Weather Radiation Initiative back in the last decade between the Weather Service and the emergency management community at every government level, local, state, and federal. And those are the people that are saving lives and mitigating property loss. All right. So they want to be proactively prepared. So there's this collaborative relationship, not only within the forecast process, within the Weather Service, but a collaborative relationship with the emergency management and now the private sector. So everybody's on the same song page doing a consistent forecast. And, you like to think that you're always on guard with respect to that. But with these cuts, there are shifts that are not being filled and balloon launches that are not being made for the radiosonde, which is being shown to be still the most important data set that's being used by numerical models. So this is all increasing risk. And at some point, it could pull apart. It could snap. And a forecast is missed at a critical time. You're just increasing the risk for that happening.
I wanted to ask about the balloons. Apparently weather balloons get launched daily around the nation. Tell me why that's important and what we get from those weather balloons. So
first of all, they're launched around the globe.
Okay.
You have to have and what's really interesting about radiosondes and balloon launches, it wasn't until the late 1930s and then into World War II and then after World War II that you needed observations of temperature, dew point for the moisture, and winds. And you needed vertical observations for those. And the driver for that was the aviation industry, the birth and the growth of the Global Aviation Committee. So one of the things that the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, focused on when it first spun up within the UN after World War II was a standard for these measurements. And because everybody recognized that you needed to have that information globally for airplanes to fly economically, from an economic point of view, but also from a safety perspective.
But are weather balloons still that important?
Yes. So what happened, the numerical modeling community relied on those basic state parameters. Those are the basic state parameters that are used in numerical modeling today. Back in the 1950s and the 1960s, when the numerical models were being created, being tested every day in front of forecasters, they weren't very good. One of the things that was really apparent in the analysis of these models was that you got to rely on the radiosondes more effectively with respect to the vertical resolution. And what's really important in the modeling framework that we all know is the backbone of forecasting around the globe today is that you need the vertical resolution of all those parameters at the same place, at the same time, independently measured. That's exactly what a radiosonde does.
And if that goes away, or if we have less of that research, then what happens?
Those data sets now, all the data sets that go into models are evaluated every day.
Right.
Every day for what is the best observation system in those model forecasts. The radiosonde is either first or second every day. Okay, that's amazing because we use a lot of satellite data. We use aircraft data around the world. We use ship data for the oceans, and you got these buoy systems now, the Argo floats. All this gets into the models because you got.
I check my weather buoy on Long Island Sound every time I go out. So yeah,
every time you go out. So those are the radiosonde is still the backbone of the data sets that go in because they also affect all the other data sets that get into the models. They work to improve those data sets. And I can go into examples for each one, but the most important one is satellites. The satellite doesn't measure temperature, dew point, or winds. They're derived, and they're derived in layers. They need that vertical resolution of the radiosonde to more effectively be usable within a numerical model. So it's really it's really an important data set that you don't want to mess around with. And that's one of my concerns right now, is that we're losing the twice per day radiosondes in a number of stations because of staffing shortages. So I think that's a critical impact that we need to pay attention to.
The National Weather Service has an annual budget of about $1.3 billion. Is this government money well spent?
Yes, I believe so. It's interesting that the emergency management community that started working with us more effectively, and we started working with them, I should turn that around. We started working with them more effectively because there's a lot of things we needed to do differently back during the first part of this century, when we realized that if we could get our forecast and warnings that were directed towards their key decision points at critical times, they could proactively be prepared for these types of extreme events that the United States, by the way, leads the world in: fire, severe weather, floods, blizzards. I mean, you put all of this together.
Yep.
We need this information more than any other nation in the world. And I didn't even mention hurricanes in that list. So the thing is,
well, we'll talk to the guy from the National Hurricane Center next. So we'll get all that.
Yeah, I'm a good friend with Mike. He'll forgive me for one slip. But
that's all right. We'll get him on the show.
The main thing is, when you ask, is it worth it? It's essential for public safety. And the emergency management is the first to tell not only weather conferences, that information. They're the ones who canvass the Hill to emphasize the point of how they need us for them to not just react to these events, surprise, we're getting, but that they're proactively preparing for hurricanes up to a week in advance now.
Right.
They're following the forecast with the Weather Service and then getting communities ready and responsive to the likelihood that the hurricane's going to affect them. And then they work with FEMA for, relocating assets, to bring in as soon as it's safe to get back into those areas. All of this is happening now, and it's being driven by weather forecasts. So yes, I think it's essential.
We call ourselves on the Good Government Show the voice of public service, and I want to read a quote from you that I found here in doing my little research about you, Doctor. It says, "Public service is not measured by the bottom line, but how well we serve society with the resources allocated by Congress." Is that an accurate quote?
Exactly.
Yeah. Is this a public service you're doing?
I think it's an essential public service, and I believe it's recognized by everybody on the Hill who, not only provided us the annual budgets, not exactly everything we needed, but you as a good government advocate, you live with the budget you're given, not with the one you wish you had. Okay, but the point is, the Hill worked very effectively with us when I was the director, and not only listened to us, but listened to all our partners out there in terms of the essential nature. And it was really incredible to see the Weather Act, the weather authorization, that reaffirmed our mission and directed us to do impact-based decision support services. That was passed by unanimous consent, bicameral, bipartisan consent from both the House and the Senate in 2017 because of the essential nature of what we do. So I feel really strongly that we have that people need to understand how important this is, that the National Weather Service provides this information not only to the general public, but to a private sector who works with the Weather Service, and it influences every aspect of what we do to better serve the American public. I think this is a good news story that shouldn't be minimized by one sentence in a report that I think was totally uninformed about exactly what we do today versus what they thought we did back, in the 1980s and 1990s. So,
and you're talking about this Project 2025 stuff.
I'm talking about Project 2025. I believe that was an uninformed paragraph that they wrote, especially with regard to the National Weather Service. A few years ago, you instituted what I guess was fairly major reforms to the National Weather Service, something called the Weather Ready Nation. Right. So you've already really streamlined, made the Weather Service more efficient. Is that correct? That's correct. We had to, back when I took over in 2013, we had a major task at hand. to deal with budget confusion and impropriety and prior that prior directors had to deal with. And we streamlined the budget structure. We streamlined the budget process. We made sure that the accountability factor of people inside the Weather Service who was developing the budget, executing the budget, and reporting to the Congress remained consistent to the information developed along that train, and it worked. And the Hill, I think, was very satisfied. I mean, they had to approve those changes, and we had to test them out. We had to do a test run for a year. But it worked in terms of getting these projects out, but also supporting the Weather Ready Nation initiative, which was a major transformation in the Weather Service in and of itself. And that all occurred in 2 or 3 years from 2013 up to about 2016.
So the Weather Service is already efficient. We don't need a government efficiency committee to make you more efficient, do we?
We always strive to be as efficient as possible. And as new science and technology became available and is becoming available, we're in this now revolution with respect to artificial intelligence. There are changes that will probably come out of that. But what's really interesting is that as we work through any kind of what we call post-processing breakthrough, which is, what happens when you get all this model data and you want to extract the most useful information from it. Now it's going to be artificial intelligence. It usually doesn't replace people. It assists them with better information and more reliability so that the decision makers can deal with people who offer them some level of certainty and reliability for forecasts which will never be perfect. Okay, and I think I need to emphasize that. The forecasts will never be perfect, okay? And people are making decisions now 7, 8, 9, 10 days in advance. So there's a level of uncertainty that has to be dealt with still, even with these advances. And that's where the human factor is going to come in to keep that level of trust, a trusted relationship between the meteorological community and those that actually have to make decisions that affect the livelihood of everybody in this country. So, I think it's an exciting time. Every time you have a new breakthrough, it's an exciting time to be a meteorologist.
All right, we're going to get back in just a moment, and we're going to talk to you about your thoughts, your true thoughts on government. We're going to do that in just a minute. Once you wrap up this episode of The Good Government Show, give a listen to our friends over at Good News for Lefties. This daily podcast highlights news stories that show there's more good news out there. Other people in government are really trying to do the right thing. That's Good News for Lefties. Listen where you're listening now. Dr. Louis Uccellini, you've had almost 50 years in government service. Tell me, what is good government?
First of all, good government involves a mission statement that people believe in, that work inside that agency, and those that are affected by the whatever the outcome of that mission statement is. I think it's incredibly important to start with that as a foundation. And I tell students when they're coming out of college or young professionals, even coming out of the private sector, when you're applying for a job, whether it's in the public or private sector, know the mission, believe in the mission. And that's the basis for good government that you build upon then the whole budget process. You're using taxpayer money. You're using the money provided by the citizens of the country to execute that mission. You have to focus on that. Like I said, you might have ideas to do other things that might be relevant, downstream or might be relevant right now. But you just can't go and say, oh, I've got all this money to play with. I think I'll do A or I'll do B. Yeah. You got to focus on advancing the mission and make sure that the people out there that are using your products and services understand what you're doing and agree that that's needed and not something else that's stopping them from whatever they're supposed to be doing with whatever that agency is doing. So I really firmly believe there's an infrastructure, there's a foundation to make that happen. It's called authorization by the Hill, appropriated resources by the Hill. An executive agency doesn't print money. I always tell folks when they came into my office and they wanted to do A, B, and C with 50 more people, and I would take them to the window and show them the white capital that I could see from it. I said, look, I don't print money. They don't even print money, but they appropriate it. And that's what's key. That's what's really key. Good government, we have the foundation for good government right up through the whole legislative process. The executive branch only executes what Congress says and pays for. And we have to remember that. And you have to stick to that appropriation, not only the budget, but the language, because that's what you've been told to do, essentially. So,
all right, okay.
So that's how the government works. That's how it's supposed to work. It's how it worked when I was the director of the Weather Service. And we were very successful in not only meeting today's mission, but dealing with the research community and the new technology to advance ourselves to continue to improve with the new technology and science that's being brought to us. So that's what I consider good government.
All right. Well, that is a good, complete answer. What drew you to public service? What made you want to get into public service?
It was interesting. I wanted to understand the weather, and right. I wanted to understand forecasting, and I wanted to understand why the forecast was right sometimes and why it was terribly wrong sometimes, especially when it was predicting heavy snow and we didn't get a flake. So
which
I always had
disappointed
that
you no end, I'm sure.
Yeah, it disappointed me to no end. So I always was interested in that, which is why, and I was told as I was growing up, meteorology is math and physics. You've got to go to a university. You've got to get a college education. My idea was to get a...
Yeah, but why public service? I mean, why didn't you just become a weatherman, on Channel 7?
I didn't know about I didn't feel public service as much as I felt I wanted to do and understand and increase my understanding of meteorology. That's why I went to NASA, because it was an incredible research opportunity, which it worked for me. It absolutely worked for me. But I started getting this nagging feeling. I wanted to improve that forecast. And if you're going to improve the forecast, like I said before, there's only one agency in the country that has the word prediction in it, or forecast. NOAA has it writ large now, but that wasn't true when I made the transition to the Weather Service, and then they were going through the modernization. It wasn't until I got into the Weather Service that I as an individual, started understanding the meaning of public service and the meaning of the importance of missions. That people around me were all there to serve that mission. And I know that's even true now because we got reviewed by McKinsey & Company in 2014 and 15, and they went out and interviewed a lot of people who worked in the Weather Service, and they came back flabbergasted that 80 to 85% of them, the first thing they mentioned when they talked about the Weather Service, the mission. We came here because of the mission. We live for the mission. That's an incredible number, 85%. For them, it was off the charts, according to McKinsey. So that's what I started feeling and understanding about public service was when I got into the Weather Service, and we had to live that every day. And when I came in, I was in charge of the largest forecast offices in the country at the time, and it just opened my eyes up to the dedication to public service of everybody in that forecast office. And then as I became more familiar with the rest of the Weather Service and interacted with people around the country, it was exactly the same. So that's how I got interested in public service, was my association with the National Weather Service.
Does someone inspire you who's in public service?
Well, I tell you, the people I worked with in the National Weather Service. And I got to tell you, every time I went into the field offices and I visited as many as I could, my goal was to visit every one, but COVID got in the way in 2020, was their dedication to public service. That's what inspired me. I mean, it was just incredible. And there were leaders that inspired me. The director, Joe Friday, was the director of the Weather Service back during the modernization when I entered the Weather Service. And I was in awe of him being able to deal with day-to-day products and services, and in all the science and new science and technology that was being brought into the Weather Service. Yeah, he was one. But I had people in NASA, Joanne Simpson, first woman to get a PhD in meteorology, was my boss for about 9 years. Talk about inspiration and stick to it in this to get the job done. In the research world, she was phenomenal. And then, of course, my professors at the University of Wisconsin. So I've had great mentors as I've grown through the Weather Service. But what you talk about inspiration, it's coming to work every day and knowing the people you're working with are just as dedicated as you are. So it's that's a long answer, but that's what drove me.
So almost 50 years in government, just short of 50 years in government. What would you like people to know about how government works?
I would say at about the 99.9% level, all the people I work with, their dedication to making the government service work for the people of the United States was really amazing to watch. Again, what people do are authorized by Congress and paid for by Congress. So they're not free wielding this for the most part. I think people should know that every day. I was particularly, I would say, angry actually when the effort went in to reduce, to just go into agencies and look for waste, fraud, and abuse, right? That was the goal of this onslaught into different agencies. And are we reading about the waste, fraud, and abuse today? No, because you might find one little thing that happened, or maybe even one big thing by one person. But, I wouldn't smear people working in government with that notion that this and it, waste, fraud, and abuse. This was just an excuse to get in. And I was just really, I would say, angry almost with respect to people saying that the government workers, there's a preponderance of government workers, and including especially those in the Weather Service that I knew and inspired me, as we just discussed, that they would find waste, fraud, and abuse. So I think people need to know how important the government service is, and I'm particularly worried about actually for the future, because there are people like me in the universities today, in the privates, in the military. We hired a number of people coming out of the military that had this tremendous work, knowledge bases for all the technical stuff, all the instruments that the Weather Service and systems that the Weather Service runs on a 24/7 basis. I think would hope that they would remain inspired to come into the Weather Service, to come into public service as part of their career, because it is a tremendously rewarding experience, and it's important for this country as well. So, that's the way I feel, and I feel like what the work we do is important for this government, even the current administration, to move forward. They're going to have to rely on the government workers in every agency. If they actually want to accomplish something, they want to be protective in something, they'll come back and rely on the civil servants to make it happen.
What's the best part of the job? And I have a two-part question there. What's the best part of the job? And when you make a weather prediction and you look out and you go, yep, we got this one right, how does that feel? And when you go out and go, yeah, we got this one wrong today, how does that make you feel? There you go. 3 questions all at once. Sorry. Yeah.
So the best part was I actually enjoyed going to work every day. In the weather business, there's always something going on in this country.
Yes.
All right. That you rely on the Weather Service. So you say, okay, well, we're in the severe weather season now. Well, you also have fire weather going on, right? At the same time. I mean, Los Angeles had that incredible fire in the middle of January.
So there's always always a weather emergency somewhere.
Going on.
Yeah.
Right, and there's all these instrumentation, the radars, there's the automated surface observing systems.
So you're never bored.
There's the radio signs. There's always things to track. We used to have these stand-ups every morning to track everything that's going on. When you have a big system, I was told by a researcher way back when I started at NASA, Rick Anthony's. He said, one thing you don't want to get wrong is you don't want to get a forecast wrong for the big one. he was absolutely right. So, when you hit the big ones, you're exhilarated. You feel really good. When you miss them, you got to bone up. You just got to stand up to it. The fact that you missed it, and here are the reasons why. So you always use. In fact, one of the things that's in the post-processing with post-mortem with respect to an event, going through what went right and what went wrong, all right, is a key part of that post. Whether you've made a good forecast or you made one that totally busted, okay? You got to do both, because there's always something to learn, even from the successes.
You learn more from the failures of the success, right?
Well, the learning process could be just as equal for the success that we could have done it 2 days earlier. If something, if there was a lot of uncertainty in the model. So you go through everything. The modeling process, the observation process, the modeling process, the dissemination process. If you have a perfect forecast and your dissemination system breaks down, okay, what good's the forecast? In fact, there's no intrinsic value in a forecast unless it influences the decision process, right?
All right. So there's a lot to it, yes.
So there's a lot to look at, even in a successful forecasting aspect. Did the service provision meet what you believe could have been met with the forecast and warnings that were provided? And that was an important aspect of discovering, hey, our job doesn't end with the forecast and warning anymore. This was back in 2011, 2012 timeframe. That was the motivation for Weather Ready Nation. We had to be able to influence the decision process, not make the decisions, not tell people what to decide, but to give them the information they needed for their changing risk preferences and for their key decision points, for them to get ready for what was coming. So that was pretty exciting stuff. And, perfect forecast doesn't lead to the right decision. What good's the perfect forecast, right? So,
okay.
So let's look at that whole picture. And I believe 2025 didn't capture that change that happened last decade, right? So they just focused on stuff that's been floating around for the last 25 years, put it into one paragraph, and didn't realize what is really essential to actually decide whether what the Weather Service is doing is good or not. They've got to influence good decisions.
Tell me something about the National Weather Service that folks may not know about. What's something your agency does people may not, know?
Well, that's interesting. The National Weather Service has 11 service areas. Okay, we all hear about hurricanes. We all hear about the tornadoes, blizzards. So that's they all have their separate programs. All year long, people are focusing on, what's needed from a programmatic point of view. We also have space weather prediction. We also predict that marine environment that you love to sail around in. Okay.
You heard about me.
So the word prediction is a fundamentally key word in our mission, because it takes an incredible global infrastructure to make it happen successfully. So I used to tell people we predict from the sun to the sea, from Guam to the Middle Atlantic, from the North Slopes of Alaska on the Arctic coast down to the Caribbean every day. All right. So we had space weather. You have to do the free atmosphere, the free of clouds for airline safety even. I mean, you're always doing something that's involving important decision processes now, from space weather through the atmosphere to the top of the ocean. And the oceanographers now are making ocean predictions all the way down to the bottom that we need to use in our models, because the atmospheric storm systems depend upon the energy source in the ocean. So I don't think people understand the broad, everybody looks out their window. I have to say, that's what's important to everybody alive, is what's happening to them.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
But to do all of that, you have to forecast from the sun to the sea.
Okay.
And the Weather Service does that today. And I think when I start talking to folks out in the general public and I lay out this big domain, that's an incredible domain space, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, for sure.
And then they say, you do that with 4,000 people? I say, yep.
Let me ask you a question. Do you ever turn on the local news just to check the weather?
I do have. I don't watch much TV.
All right.
I think I'm part of that general trend where people rely on the web.
But do you check the local weather? Do you listen to the radio or something like that?
Always. I drive my family nuts. I'm always checking the weather. And I have different groups of retirees that, some are interested in what's going on along the coast. Some are interested in winter, weather and all that. So it keeps me going. The hurricane group. And then, of course, one of the big things is fire weather. That's really the new I'd say the new kid on.
So you're always checking the weather. In other words, you're always checking the weather. Well, this is the Good Government Show. We always try to bring it back to good government. Tell me about a good government project that you were part of that you're proud of.
Well, the biggest thing is that every organization I've been in, I've actually been in a creation mode. So when I got to NASA, the lab was being spun up. I wound up creating a section under Joanne Simpson in mesoscale modeling analysis and its application to the use and then interpretation of satellite data. We created that section, all right, and I felt really good that we were meeting the needs not only of the laboratory but of NASA. And then being part of the modernization of the National Weather Service was really exciting. It was one of the things that attracted me in the 1990s. This is what brought the Doppler radar, for example, into the Weather Service. There's a lot more, better models, better satellites. But everybody saw the Doppler radar on TV every day and said, wow, this is really fantastic stuff. But I think the thing I'm most proud of was the restructuring of the Weather Service budget, because it was totally incomprehensible to anybody. I was on the corporate board for 14 years before I became the director, and even I didn't understand that structure. But I did understand that it caused a lot of confusion, even in people trying to make it work. So we restructured that to map the forecast process and simplified it so that it became more transparent to everybody, including the people on the Hill, who could see where the money was going and how it was being applied according to the appropriation law. And then we'd come back and review on a quarterly basis, not only how we were spending the money, directed towards the projects and how those projects were advancing, and it worked. It absolutely worked.
So there was no need for a government efficiency investigation because you've already done the work.
Well, people who come in and are new, if they want to investigate, if they want to look, fine, but don't start with the notion that all the government workers are just laying around or sitting around and not doing their jobs. That's what really angered me with respect to NOAA and the Weather Service, is that the people there. And by the way, the Weather Service actually depends on components of NOAA, satellites, the research.
Well, sure, you're all part of the same administration, right?
Yeah, right. And the point is, it's going to be pretty hard to live up to those headlines back from January 20th that this is just people sitting around not doing their jobs. So that, to me, it's just.
Well, you have certainly shown in the last conversation that is absolutely certainly not true, at least not from your point of view. Dr. Louis Uccellini, the former director of the National Weather Service, 33 years in the National Weather Service, almost 50 years in government, including at NASA. An incredible resume, an incredible body of work. Thank you for your public service. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I could go on this for hours, but really a fascinating look at the Weather Service and an inside look at government from your perspective. Thank you so much.
And thank you, David, for having me.
The Good Government Show is sponsored by Our. That's OUR for Our Community. Get involved. We hear that all the time from government leaders. Our co-brands with your government's name and logo. Your staff and the people you serve are connected and part of your community. From any device, your members provide reliable data and meaningful feedback. Ask a question like, do we want more parkland or better homeless services? More engaged conversations come through the Our app. Visit Ourco, that's OURCO.com, and book a demonstration. After you get done with this episode, hear more good government stories with our friends at How to Really Run a City. Former mayors Kasim Reed of Atlanta and Michael Nutter of Philadelphia, and their co-host, journalist and author Larry Platt, talk with guests and other mayors about how to really get stuff done in cities around the nation. Check them out where you're listening now or through their nonprofit news site, thephiladelphiacitizen.org/podcasts. Here's what I learned. A few years ago, Dr. Louis Uccellini did a top-to-bottom review of the National Weather Service. They made changes, some major changes, and created a more streamlined, more efficient organization. They worked with the National Academy of Public Administration and Congress and changed the way they worked. It took a few years, but they got it done. And that, friends and neighbors, is how you make government more efficient. Cutting jobs and leaving offices understaffed only makes us less safe and less efficient. And here's one thing that really stood out. He said to be successful, even the current administration, they have to rely on government workers in every agency if they want to accomplish something. Here on the Good Government Show, we couldn't agree more. Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Please like us and share us with your friends and review us right here where you're listening. And check out our website, goodgovernmentshow.com, for extras. Help us keep telling stories of good government in action everywhere. Join us again for another episode right here. I'm Dave Martin, and this is The Good Government Show. The Good Government Show is a Valley Park production. Jim Ludlow, Dave Martin, that's me, and David Snyder are the executive producers. Our show is edited and produced by Jason Stershic. Please subscribe, then share us, and like us and review us. That's the best way to make sure we're able to keep telling these stories of our government working for all of us. Then listen to the next episode of The Good Government Show.